Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 23rd of May. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the latest weather happenings around your part of Alaska by going to weather.gov and clicking on Alaska. That will take you to the Fairbanks, the Anchorage, or the Juneau National Weather Service office. Perhaps you're interested in a flight plan making for the weekend. You can do that by clicking on the left-hand side of your screen for aviation weather. You'll find the links to the pictures that you'll see here on the show tonight from the TV desk. And of course, there's the ice desk. You can get information there, as well as hydrologic information from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. All of that under one roof by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Weather info line at 800-472-0391. You can get your forecasts that way and write down the number as you dial it in there. You can use it again a little bit faster the next time. On Twitter, as you well know, on Facebook under NWS Alaska, and on YouTube in the afternoon. You get your daily afternoon map briefing about 3:45 to 4 o'clock or so. And then after this show, a little bit later in the evening, you'll find the full broadcast there. If you wish to download that and watch that on YouTube, simply search for AKWX TV, Alaska Weather for short, or go to alaskapublic.org, our broadcast partner here. Here's tonight's hazardous weather. As of right now until the evening hours, about 10 o'clock or so, we're expecting red flag warnings to continue. That's for the western Kenai Peninsula and for the Susitna Valley. The good news is, as we're looking ahead to tomorrow, we do not have any fire weather watches present across any part of the state as of yet. And we don't have any expectations that we're going to continue red flag warnings as of yet. Obviously, that can change as we get around to the evening hours and the overnight hours. But for right now, conditions seem to be improving as far as the intense fire danger goes. So hopefully that'll be the case when we wake up in the morning. Looking out to the west, a sign of a pattern change, perhaps. This could be good news. Low pressure south of the Kamchatka Peninsula shows low pressure sitting and spiraling there, and a nice plume of Pacific moisture pointed to the north and east. And this is going to wrap around a ridge, and a lot of this is initially going to miss us in the coming days. But this is a sign that maybe that western ridge that's been controlling a lot of the weather and blocking any wetter weather from moving into southern Alaska is breaking down a little bit. So we're going to keep an eye on this. This is not a for sure thing yet, but it is a sign that maybe something is working toward an end here as far as the really dry weather goes, and what has continued and exacerbated the fire danger, at least across southern parts of our state. Now, as we look at the visible satellite picture, we're looking at the dry weather that is still here. You'll notice very little cloud cover across the lower and middle Yukon. Plenty of clouds across the coastal plain today. Areas of snow were falling around Barrow and Atkasuk by late afternoon. Across the Bering Sea, you see some pockets of clearing around the stratus and the fog there, but quite a considerable amount of cloud cover south of St. Paul to Unalaska, Adak, and Shemya. But if you're in St. Paul tonight, you probably are looking north and at least seeing a little bit of sunshine there, so a little bit of a bright spot there. Around Bristol Bay, some clearing, also around Kodiak Island, and some patchy cloud cover across the Gulf. Some of that, once again, across Cordova blew up into thunderstorm activity again this afternoon, so second day in a row for you. Across southeast, patchy cloud cover, not as much rain there today as there was in previous days. In fact, yesterday, areas around Annette set record rainfall. I believe it was over 3 inches of rain in just 24 hours, so a record for that particular day. Probably not your wettest day ever, but it was a little bit of a soaker, it looked like, across southern parts of southeast yesterday. Here's a look at the weather map now. Tonight, a weak area of low pressure across southern and eastern sections of the mainland there, including the Copper River Basin and just that one lonely area of thunderstorms next to Cordova. Smoke will continue to be a part of the forecast plan for the weekend across the Kenai Peninsula. One thing that's going to change, though, is the winds, instead of being northerly, as they have been for a good part of today, are beginning to turn to the south and west. So if you're in Anchorage, if you're in Matsu, you're probably going to see more smoke as we get into maybe tonight and maybe into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. High pressure across the Bering, sitting pretty, not moving for anybody, and you can see another area of high pressure poking its way up into the eastern part of the Bering, with low pressure sitting right along the ridge tops of the Brooks Range, with snow up across the north slope. Tonight's forecast shows a high trying to work its way in there across the north. We may still have some pockets of snow. The bulk of that looks like it starts to creep off to the east. Maybe an evening storm there across the eastern part of Prince William Sound around Cordova. That's about it. Showers for the higher terrain, if any, and same goes for southeast. A wave of low pressure across the southern part of the Gulf. High pressure still sitting across the southern Bering, but it does look like it's moving a little bit. We're going to keep an eye on that. And here is that approaching wave of low pressure coming up from the North Pacific and reaching the western Aleutians. Really not going to move over the western Aleutians, at least for a little while. It's going to strengthen a little bit back to the west. The winds will pick up from the south and southeast there, so watch for that around Kiska and Attu. Most areas not seeing any sizable wind or waves from that initially. High pressure just north of Dutch Harbor and Alaska. Still locking in low clouds all the way up to the Pribilofs. Around Kotzebue Sound, pockets of snow and rain mixed together there. Some of that will creep into the western Brooks Range. High pressure north of the Yukon and over the Beaufort Seacoast will stretch a little bit of snow over Kaktovik and maybe out toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. Again, some spotty areas of mountain showers there for Saturday. A lot of that really drying up, though, to the south and west. Kodiak still looking dry. Low pressure still spinning south of the Gulf of Alaska, and some pockets of rain for southeast once again over the Dixon entrance. As we get into Sunday, south central is drying up a little bit more, but again, we have a little bit more of that southwesterly flow. Pockets of rain there across the Brooks Range. North of the summits and the coastal plain, you're looking at snow showers now instead of just a steadier snowfall. And scattered areas of rain and maybe some slightly breezy conditions there across the central and eastern chain. Some areas of rain starting to creep eastward a little bit more than they have in recent days, and high pressure is on the move still, so it's back over Bristol Bay, but it's not locked in step right there across south central. So things are shifting around a little bit, and this is a good thing as we go ahead in time. You want to see that weather pattern starting to show some signs of progression or movement. Things are breaking down there if this is happening. So low pressure continues across southeast by the end of the weekend. So temperature-wise today, a milder day for southeast without a whole bucket load of rainfall across southeast. We don't have those really cool temperatures across the southern part of the state. You're looking at 50s and 60s today, not bad at all. 62 there around Wrangell, and mid-50s there for Annette, Ketchikan, and Hyder. As you get out around Prince William Sound, temps are a little bit milder today around Valdez and Cordova. You saw temps in the mid-50s there. 64 around Anchorage, upper 50s, almost 60 degrees in fact around Homer and Seward. 61 around Kodiak. Talkeetna showing 63. Around Fairbanks it was 57 degrees. Northway and Eagle both in the 50s. Mid to upper 40s around Fort Yukon. Arctic Village was 36. Anaktuvuk Pass 28, and then you're back into the low 20s again for the Arctic coast. Looked like Kaktovik was hovering above freezing today. The same goes for Point Hope. 42 in Kivalina, 35 in Kotzebue, and 28 in Shishmaref, 36 for Nome. About the same there in Norton Sound. Most communities there above freezing. 55 in Bethel, and along the Yukon Valley, conditions were considerably warmer. McGrath was showing up to 60 degrees this afternoon. 50s and 60s around Bristol Bay. The Pribilofs in the upper 30s to about 40 degrees, and 40s and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula. And you saw colder temperatures there if you're in Adak, Atka, or Shemya, all in the 40s this afternoon. Overnight low temperatures will hover above freezing for the chain and for the Alaska Peninsula, probably above 40 degrees. The YK likely in the 30s and 40s tonight, north of the Yukon and into the Norton Sound region. Most areas just a hair below freezing. Nome should stay just above it, 33. 25 around Tin City, Shishmaref, about the mid-20s there. Kotzebue Sound looking at temps in the lower to mid-20s with the Arctic coast in the teens, including Barrow at 15. Fort Yukon 32, Tanana, you're in the upper 20s tonight, mid-30s for Fairbanks, lower 40s for the Mat-Su, the Kenai Peninsula, and Anchorage. The Kodiak 42, and for most of southeast, lower to mid-40s should do the trick. High temperatures tomorrow are expected to be warm again across the Kuskokwim Valley. Expect temperatures in the upper 50s and lower 60s. Fairbanks 63. Looks like Ambler and Bettles in the upper 50s to upper 40s to lower 50s, I should say. Mid 20s for the Arctic coast. Wainwright about 24. Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse 27. 40 in Nome. Bethel showing almost 50 degrees. Bristol Bay should have a nice day in the low 60s there. Kodiak 58. 40s and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, Port Heiden, Pilot Point, Sand Point, all in the 40s and 50s, so not too bad at all. 45 in Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, 41 in St. Paul, and temperatures on either side of the 60-degree mark, approaching it there, maybe tapping it in Juneau at 60 degrees even. Flying weather. Well, we have to point out there is potential for smoke to be restricting visibilities across the Kenai Peninsula, maybe out into the Gulf tomorrow, so watch for that. Otherwise, MVFR conditions around cloud cover, including rain across the Dixon entrance, and then a wide swath of IFR from the western end of the Brooks Range into Kotzebue Sound, parts of Norton Sound, St. Matthew, and north of St. Paul, and the western part of the chain. Otherwise, MVFR conditions for the eastern coastal plain and the eastern Brooks Range and offshore into the Chukchi Seacoast, and then around the fog and stratus across the Bering Sea and the central part of the chain. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass are both expected to be VFR tomorrow, so improvement over what we've seen today. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be listed at VFR through most of the day. Rainy Pass should also be good. Windy Pass, expect visual. Same goes for Isabel Pass tomorrow. Mentasta Pass should be smooth sailing, and Tanita Pass expected to be VFR. Porter's Pass, we're going to limit that a little bit to MVFR due to smoke. Now, if that's not the case, you could have clear sailing. It will only be to the smoke limitations there, so if smoke's not present, expect a much better day. And MVFR transitioning toward VFR conditions there for the northern parts of southeast and the passes there. Freezing levels, well, the warm air is trying to win it back across the YK Delta. You can see that surface freezing line creeping northward once again. We still have limited amounts of warm air across south central aloft, and you can see the ridge still holding on across the eastern chain and Bristol Bay, 6,000 to 8,000 foot levels there, and a little bit lower across some of the higher terrain in southeast thanks to low pressure dragging in a little bit more of that cold air. As you look at the icing potential, it's pretty limited though. Over the mainland, very few threats. If there's going to be anything probably of note, it'll be around the north of the Bering Strait, around St. Lawrence Island, and some question marks. I didn't draw this one in, but some question marks around any lingering areas of snow and sub-freezing temperatures there in the coastal plain. So if you're in Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay, maybe out to Barrow, that's probably a little farther west. I'll keep an eye on this area tomorrow, but didn't add that in just because of question marks. And then out to the west, cold front trying to work its way in across the North Pacific, or the occluded front anyway. That'll have enough moisture and enough lift, but you have to go pretty high up there to find anything with the small plane. Tomorrow's jet stream, well, there's trough across the Arctic Ocean. That has pretty much been the rule for most of this week. We have a trough that's sitting across the Gulf and into the North Pacific. And here comes the little bit of a change, a little bit of a dip in the jet stream, and we're going to see if this can kick this system out of place, out over Alaska. And if it can do that in the next couple days, then maybe by early next week we'll have some weather working in from the southwest, approaching some of the drier parts of the state. Low pressure across the eastern part of the Gulf, still bringing in that light southerly flow, about 5 to 15 knots or so from the south and southeast over southeastern Alaska. A southwesterly flow across the central chain working up and over that trough. That's coming in around 20 knots or so. 30 knots of wind from the west across the middle Yukon Valley and 20 knots across the Arctic coast. Low pressure sitting way out there across the North Pacific and the western Bering, also bringing in more of a southerly flow. And underneath that, at 3,000 feet, the winds pick up a little bit more to about 50 knots or so. 20 knots across Adak and Atka, and a light southwesterly flow coming over Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and up toward the Pribilofs. We have our trough. It's a little bit further west across the Gulf of Alaska. That's bringing winds around parallel to the coastline all the way around. About 10 to 20 knots, and more of that westerly flow coming across the continent about 10, 20, 30 knots or so. The same goes for the Arctic coast, Norton Sound, and Kotzebue Sound. Turbulence potential, obviously things are looking pretty good here. Not a whole lot of wind issues. If there's going to be any chop, chances are it'll be along some of the ridge tops in vicinity of what's left of the front across the Brooks Range, and perhaps out across the west as some of those winds begin to pick up a little bit more ahead of that approaching system. Other than that, flying weather looks pretty good. Limitations would be snow in the north and perhaps smoke in the south. Keep your eye on the changing weather over the weekend and definitely fly safe. And we'll be back with a look at your marine weather and, of course, the Ice Edge update here in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor. We'd like to thank Alaska Public Media for allowing us to bring you Hangar Flying tonight. We are pleased to have Adam White back on our show. Adam is the Legislative and Government Affairs Representative with the Alaska Airmen's Association. He's been involved with the working group that has been figuring out how to make communications safer for pilots flying in the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. Welcome back, Adam.
Thanks, Mary.
On our last show, we talked about the frequency changes that are coming for pilots flying in the Mat-Su Valley.
Right.
We talked about the new maps that show what frequencies will be used where and how people could access the maps and other information. Can you tell us how the information about the frequency changes is being spread out?
So there's the Go Fly Alaska website that we talked about last week that a lot of other associations and organizations are pointing to. There's a publication that's out there in some of the airports where folks can see the graphic. But most importantly, it's in the new charting cycle. In your Alaska supplement, and the CTAF frequencies are listed on the sectionals now. And it's important that you upgrade to the newest version of that, update your database and your GPS, and be able to get that information that way. So
pilots who have a flight review coming up this year should probably be prepared with a new supplement to impress their flight instructor.
That would be a good thing. I'm a flight instructor as well, and it always makes a good impression when the folks come in and they've got all their ducks in a row. But again, that brings up a very good point that if your flight instructor doesn't talk about this during a flight review, here's your chance to show them how smart you are and educate them. So, yeah, it's a good way to do that.
Very good. Is there any way to track the pilots that have had problems with the new area frequencies? Or what if a pilot wants to talk to a live person? Say if his flight instructor doesn't know or isn't familiar, where can he find out information?
Well, thanks to the Alaska Aviation Safety Foundation, you guys have been able to set up a place on your website where people can go and ask questions, they can give us feedback. We know that this process is not complete. We know it's not perfect. But we feel like we've done a lot of hard work to get it to where we are now, and we do need that feedback. We really, really do, and we're asking for it. That folks let us know where they see some potential conflicts coming up because of this, or if they see some areas that could be improved, or if they just are curious, why did you put the line here, and why is this particular area inside the 22.8 zone versus the 22.9? And we'd be more than willing to go back and get back in touch with you and have that conversation. Because if you don't know and you don't understand, then we failed in what we were striving for.
And as you brought up the point about why some of the boundaries are why they are, I've been to a couple presentations and there's been a lot of questions in particular about the boundary that runs west along the river.
Yes.
Why doesn't that go straight down the river?
Well, that was a very long discussion when that came up. And when you think about what we're trying to accomplish, and if we were to put the line down the center of the main channel, we know what happens when weather starts to degrade. People go to the areas they know, they go to a landmark that they know will take them the direction they're going, and the Susitna River is one of those landmarks. And we didn't want to have a situation where people were flying north and south along the river, and if the line was right on the river, somebody on the west bank was on one frequency and somebody on the east bank would be on another, but yet we could only have 30 to 50 feet clearance between wingtips. And that's the very thing we're trying to avoid. So what we did is we took that boundary and moved it to the west side of the river a mile or so, and again, it's arbitrary as to where that is, but close proximity to the west bank, so that if you were along the river, everybody's on the same frequency. And so that was one of the things that was a lot of discussion during the whole working group.
That's a great idea. So the boundaries aren't necessarily carved in stone. If there are problem areas or there need to be revisions, that's always something that can happen later?
It can be, yeah. And you know, this is not the only area of the state we're looking at. There's other areas, hotspots, that are on the list to go back and do this same type of thing with. And we know this process is not done for the Mat-Su, but we needed to get something that was workable, that was doable, and was a good product before this year's flying season, because the last thing any of us wanted to do was to go through another flying season with the confusion that we've had through the years.
Exactly. So for added safety, would you encourage pilots flying through this area to still go through a flight following service?
Most definitely. When you see the graphic that was put out by industry, it mentions that when you are not in communication with ATC, if you're not having VFR flight following, or you're not actively talking to center, that it's this is the guidance. We encourage people to get VFR flight following. A little bit about my background: I live north of the range, and when I come down to the Anchorage Bowl, I'm in contact with Anchorage Center and then Anchorage Approach as early as I can, because their eyes looking at that radar scope are much better than my eyes looking outside the cockpit.
That's great advice. Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you so much for your efforts. It's been very helpful having you describe the rationale and the reasons behind some of these changes that are coming up.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Pilots, please be sure and check frequency changes when you're flying through or landing at airports or any landing areas within the Mat-Su area. May 29th, mark your calendars. Until next time, fly safely.
Time for your marine weather forecast. We'll start with the sea ice edge. Once again, this from our sea ice desk experts there. If you are seeing any shorefast ice still in your communities, it is very unstable, so make sure you are staying off the shorefast ice through the weekend here as things are rapidly changing along the coastlines of the Bering Strait and also into the Kotzebue Sound region and St. Lawrence Island. The ice continues to fall apart there and melt. Things are rapidly opening up around the Bering Strait. Now you can see some open leads up toward Tin City, south of Nome into all of Norton Sound once again, and around the north side of St. Lawrence Island, also north of the Bering Strait. But once again, the shorefast ice, probably the most critical message with this chart today. The shorefast ice again becoming rapidly unstable. If it's not already there, it probably is and will be in short order. Here's a look at southeast now. South and easterly winds are working their way up toward Petersburg and around Sitka today. An offshore flow as we head into tomorrow with a 6-foot sea anywhere south of Sitka to Craig. Southeasterlies across the Clarence Strait, 3-foot seas there with the southeast flow up to 15 knots. More of a southerly flow in the Lynn Canal tomorrow. And light and variable winds, 4 to 5-foot seas from Yakutat to about Gustavus and Sitka tomorrow. Looks like a great day. Northwesterly winds will reverse course there as we get in toward Yakutat on Sunday. Northerlies coming down the coast and then becoming northeasterly and blowing offshore from Sitka. A westerly onshore flow coming into Craig and the Dixon entrance, and northwesterlies coming down the inner waterways from Juneau toward Petersburg and Ketchikan and Metlakatla. Otherwise, a southerly flow for the north and south Lynn Canal, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea to wrap up Sunday. For south central on Saturday, look for the winds to reverse course through Shelikof Strait, 15 knots, a southeasterly flow coming over the Barren Islands, and then a stronger and steady southerly flow at 25 knots coming up the Cook Inlet with 2-foot seas in the north, 6-foot seas around Kenai. A southeasterly flow coming into Prince William Sound, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea on the inside, 5 feet on the outside, and easterly onshore winds coming into Seward and Homer and the Barren Islands around 10 to 15 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas. The winds continue from the south as we head through Sunday. Again, if you're in the Anchorage or Mat-Su area, this could mean more smoke for you from the Funny River fire, if that is still continuing. A southeasterly flow coming into the Barren Islands, 25 knots from the Shelikof Strait, and around 10 knots or so. On a variable note, east of Kodiak with a 4-foot sea. Variable winds, a little bit stronger outside of Prince William Sound, but otherwise variable around the northern parts of the Gulf and the west, 3 to 4-foot seas on the outside. Across the Alaska Peninsula, a west and northwesterly flow inside Bristol Bay, 20 knots there with a 4-foot sea. Northwesterlies as you head out toward Cold Bay with a 4-foot sea, and Pacific, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea also on Saturday from Chignik all the way down to Sandpoint and King Cove. For Sunday, look for a southwesterly flow to pick up. Again, 15 to 20 knots with a 3 to 4-foot sea in the Pacific. 10 knots from the south and west inside of Bristol Bay. Southeasterlies on the north side of the peninsula with a 2-foot sea there on Sunday. And for the chain, the broadest area of stronger winds will be out across the west and west central part of the chain, as you see in response to that low pressure system that's getting a little bit closer to the islands as we get to Saturday and Sunday. That's about 30 knots, 7 to 11-foot seas there. Otherwise, broad southerly flow coming up from Nikolsky to Atka and Adak, 15 to 20 knots. Variable winds north of Unalaska and Nikolsky, more of a northwesterly flow there on the eastern side of the ridge. Remember, high pressure sitting right about here on Saturday. Well, that's going to shift a little bit as we head into Sunday and we start to pick up that stronger return flow. A little bit of a shift in the winds here, but mostly it's a southerly flow, 20 to 25 knots, 4 to 5-foot seas on the Bering side, 7 to 9-foot seas on the Pacific side, and you can see a northeasterly kind of a kink in the flow there, wrapping into low pressure that's right about here, 9 to 10 feet or so by the end of the weekend for seas in the west and central part of the chain. Now for the west coast, we have a south and westerly flow, 15 to 20 knots from St. Lawrence Island down to St. Matthew Island waters, Nunivak Island, more of a northwesterly flow in the Kuskokwim Bay area, and light and variable winds and small seas around the Pribilofs for Saturday. Looking at Sunday, that begins to take on more of a southeasterly flow with a 3-foot sea, southwesterly onshore winds coming to the Kuskokwim Bay, south and southwesterlies coming into the northern Bering, and variable winds around the St. Matthew Island waters with a 5-foot sea expected there Sunday. And winds are going to be pretty light across the Arctic coast for Saturday, only 5 knots or so in some places. Easterlies at 10 knots north of Barrow, southwesterlies inside of Kotzebue Sound for Saturday. That continues for Sunday. Winds become a little more east and northeasterly down the Chukchi Sea coast, only at 10 knots. Still looking at plenty of ice there, and 5 to 10 knot winds across the Beaufort Sea coast for Sunday. Let's recap the weather situation for your holiday weekend. It is Memorial Day weekend, of course, for Monday. And a few showers around some of the higher terrain tonight, maybe a storm around Cordova. We've already had one again today. A couple pockets of rain around southeast, not as substantial as what we were looking at yesterday with the record-setting rain around some of the southern parts of southeast. Low pressure sitting in the southern Gulf and a more potent wave west and south of the Aleutians. We'll keep an eye on that, but again, that represents maybe the first sign of the pattern changing up a little bit as we head into the early part of next week for a large part of the mainland. High pressure shifts around in the northern Gulf. We have low pressure sitting in the southern Gulf for Saturday. Some spotty showers across the higher terrain. A better chance for mixed precipitation around Kotzebue Sound in the western parts of the Brooks Range. Maybe a few showers around the YK Delta north of Hooper Bay. A few areas of snow across the eastern Brooks Range, maybe Kaktovik out toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. And here's that next wave again, working its way in just a little bit more toward Kiska and Attu. That's Saturday afternoon and evening. Here's Sunday, and the wave falls apart, but again, it's breaking down high pressure. The system that's been sitting tight across the southern Bering for more than a week, in fact. So if that's moving around, that's probably a good sign if you're looking for weather and a different weather pattern overall. Pockets of rain across the southern parts of southeast again on Sunday. A few showers there in the Copper River Basin and northward for the Alaska Range, and an opportunity for more smoke to spread northward on that southerly flow across south central. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, wishing you a very happy and good Memorial Day weekend. Thanks for watching.
The National Weather Service.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.